Once upon a time, in a small African village surrounded by golden fields and tall baobab trees, there lived a young girl named Tariro. She had a heart full of dreams and a spirit as bright as the morning sun, but life had not been kind to her. When she was just 6 years old, her mother, the only person who had ever truly loved her, passed away, leaving her alone in a world that suddenly felt cold and unforgiving. Her father, Masimba, was a hard-working man who wanted to see his daughter happy again. Hoping to bring warmth back into their home, he remarried a woman named Jalia. At first, Tariro thought things might get better. She wanted to believe Jalia would love her, care for her, and fill the empty space her mother had left. But hope can be deceiving. Jalia was nothing like her mother. She was cruel, jealous, and full of bitterness. Instead of welcoming Tariro as her own, she treated her like an unwanted burden. Tariro's life became a never-ending cycle of suffering. While Jalia's own son, Chain, played freely with other children, Tariro was forced to work from sunrise to sunset. She cooked, cleaned, fetched water, and did everything Jalia commanded. Yet no matter how hard she tried, it was never enough. If she made even the smallest mistake, Jalia's wrath would come crashing down on her. Sometimes it was harsh words, sometimes it was hunger, and sometimes it was something worse. Her father was often away, traveling to distant villages for work, unaware of the nightmare his daughter was living in. The villagers saw Tariro's suffering, but no one dared to speak up against Jalia. She had a sharp tongue and an even sharper heart, and those who crossed her faced her cruelty. Day by day, Tariro felt herself fading, as if she were disappearing into the shadows of a life that wasn't meant to be hers. She had no one to turn to, no escape, and no hope, until one fateful day, everything changed. From the moment the sun peeked over the horizon, Tariro's suffering began. Before the village had even stirred awake, she was already on her feet, sweeping the dirt floor of their small hut, scrubbing the pots from last night's meal, though she had barely eaten any of it, and fetching water from the river, her small arms struggling under the weight of the heavy clay pot. Jalia never lifted a finger. She sat comfortably, barking orders, while Tariro ran from one task to another, like a servant trapped in a house she once called home. No matter how hard she worked, it was never enough. If Jalia found a single speck of dust, if the porridge was not thick enough, if the water she brought was not as cool as expected, there was punishment. Sometimes it was harsh words that stung as deeply as any slap. Other times it was worse. A sharp pinch, a slap across the face, or a strike with whatever was closest to Jalia's reach. Tariro never cried in front of her. She had learned that tears only made things worse. Food was not a right for Tariro. It was something she had to earn. And most days, Jalia decided she hadn't earned it. While Chain ate fresh, warm meals, Tariro was left with scraps, hard crusts of bread, a few spoonfuls of cold porridge, or sometimes nothing at all. She could hear her stomach growl at night as she lay on the cold, hard floor, curled up in the corner, like an unwanted stray dog. Hunger became a constant companion, gnawing at her insides, making her weak. But still, she had to keep working. If she slowed down, Jalia would notice, and there would be more punishment. Chain, spoiled and cruel like his mother, found endless joy in tormenting her. He would block her way when she carried heavy loads, trip her so she fell, and laugh when she scraped her knees. He called her names, mocking her ragged clothes, saying she looked like a beggar. Sometimes he would spill food on the ground and sneer, "Here, eat this. That's what you deserve." Tariro never responded. She kept her head down and endured, because she knew there was no one to defend her. The village people saw. They saw the bruises on her arms when she went to fetch water. They noticed how thin she was becoming, how her once bright eyes now looked hollow. They whispered among themselves, shaking their heads, but no one stepped forward. Jalia's wrath was something even grown men feared, and no one wanted to be her next target. Tariro learned early that the world was not fair. No one was coming to save her. At night, when the house was finally quiet, she allowed herself to dream. She imagined running away, escaping to a place where no one would hurt her, where she could be free. But where would she go? Who would take in a girl with nothing? These thoughts kept her awake, but by morning she would push them away, because no matter how much she dreamed, reality was waiting for her, and reality was cruel. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long golden shadows over the river as Tariro dragged herself along the worn path, a heavy clay pot balanced on her head. The journey was long, her body weak from hunger, and every step felt like lifting stones with her feet. The cool breeze from the water should have brought her comfort, but she felt nothing, just exhaustion, just emptiness. She crouched by the riverbank, dipping the pot into the clear water, watching the ripples spread across the surface. For a moment, she wished she could disappear into them, sink beneath, and never resurface. A rustling noise from behind made her turn. An old woman stood just a few feet away, leaning on a wooden staff, her deep-set eyes studying Tariro with an intensity that sent shivers down her spine. It was Nana Casey, the woman people in the village spoke of in whispers. Some called her wise, others called her dangerous. Children were told never to stare at her for too long, lest she put a spell on them. But as Tariro looked at her now, there was no fear, only curiosity. The old woman stepped closer, her wrinkled hand reaching out to touch Tariro's arm. Her fingers brushed against the bruises hidden beneath the fabric of her torn dress. She sighed deeply, shaking her head. "You carry a great burden, child," she murmured, her voice filled with something Tariro had not heard in a long time, concern. Tariro tried to hold it in, tried to be strong as she always had, but something about Nana Kessi, about her kind eyes and the warmth in her voice, shattered the walls she had built around herself. Before she could stop herself, tears spilled down her cheeks, silent but uncontrollable. The weight of every insult, every beating, every lonely night crashed over her like a flood. Her body shook as she whispered the words she had never dared to say out loud, words about her suffering, about Jalia's cruelty, about how she had no one, how she had nothing. Nana Casey listened without a single interruption. When Tariro finally fell silent, her breath ragged, the old woman leaned in close and whispered words that made Tariro's heart stop. "You are not who you think you are. There is a secret about you that even you don't know." Tariro's breath caught in her throat. She blinked, staring at Nana Kessi in confusion. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. But the old woman only smiled, her eyes filled with something unreadable. "Not yet, child," she said. "Not yet." And with that, she turned and walked away, leaving Tariro standing there, the weight of those words pressing down on her, heavier than the water she carried. Tariro couldn't shake the old woman's words. "You are not who you think you are." They echoed in her mind, filling her with both fear and curiosity. What did Nana Casey mean? How could there be a secret about her that she didn't know? She had lived her entire life as an unwanted burden, an orphan left to suffer under Jalia's cruelty. There was nothing special about her, just a girl who had lost everything. As she carried the heavy water pot back home, her thoughts raced. Was Nana Casey just playing tricks on her, or did she truly know something? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but before she could ask more, the old woman had disappeared, vanishing into the trees as if she had never been there. That night, as Tariro lay on the hard floor in the corner of the hut, sleep refused to come. Jalia and Chain snored soundly, full from a meal she had cooked but barely tasted herself. The moonlight streamed through the cracks in the hut, and then she remembered Nana Casey's words before she left. "Come to the river when the moon is full." Her heart pounded. Sneaking out was dangerous. If Jalia caught her, the punishment would be unbearable. But something deep inside her, something she couldn't explain, pulled her toward the river. Quietly, she pushed herself up, careful not to make a sound. Step by step, she tiptoed to the door, holding her breath as she slipped outside. The village was silent, bathed in silver light. The wind whispered through the trees as Tariro hurried down the familiar path, her bare feet barely making a sound on the dirt road. Every shadow made her heart race, but she didn't stop. When she reached the river, Nana Kessi was already there, standing tall under the glow of the full moon. Her presence was calm yet powerful, as if she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. "You came," the old woman said, a small smile on her lips. Tariro swallowed hard. "What did you mean earlier?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What secret?" Nana Casey studied her for a moment before speaking. "Tariro, you are not just an ordinary girl. You are the lost daughter of a powerful lineage, descendants of Queen Nyasha, the greatest ruler this land has ever known." Tariro's breath caught in her throat. That can't be true," she stammered. "I'm just a girl. No one. Nothing." The old woman stepped closer, placing a firm but gentle hand on Tariro's shoulder. "Your mother was not just a villager. She carried the royal bloodline, a bloodline that has been hunted, erased, and hidden for years. But you are the last of it." Tariro shook her head. It didn't make sense. She had spent her whole life being treated like she was worthless. How could she possibly be part of something so grand? But Nana Casey wasn't finished. "Your blood carries a gift," she continued. "A gift that has been passed down through generations. The ability to command the elements. The power to sense the truth in people's hearts. It is inside you, whether you believe it or not." Tariro felt dizzy, overwhelmed by the weight of the words. "That's impossible," she whispered. The old woman held her gaze, her eyes fierce yet filled with warmth. "The world has tried to break you, Tariro," she said, "but you were born to rise." Something deep within Tariro stirred. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel weak. A part of her wanted to believe. A part of her wanted to know more. And in that moment, under the moonlit sky, everything changed. Tariro returned from the river that night with her heart pounding. She could barely breathe, barely think. Nana Casey's words echoed in her mind. "You are not who you think you are." Was it really possible? Could she, the girl who had spent her life as a servant in her own home, truly be the descendant of a great queen? She lay awake on the cold floor, staring at the ceiling, too overwhelmed to sleep. She had spent her entire life believing she was nothing, that she was unwanted, unworthy. But for the first time, a tiny spark flickered inside her, one she didn't quite understand, but couldn't ignore. The next night, Tariro snuck out again, making her way to the river. Nana Casey was already there, waiting, as if she had known Tariro would return. "Good," the old woman said, nodding approvingly. "You are ready to learn." Tariro didn't know what she was ready for, but she listened. She listened as Nana Casey told her about her ancestors, warriors, healers, rulers who had shaped the land with wisdom and strength. She spoke of Queen Nyasha, a woman so powerful that even kings feared her, a leader who had been erased from history by those who wanted her bloodline forgotten. "But the bloodline was never truly lost," Nana Casey said, looking at Tariro with knowing eyes. "It survived. In you." Tariro didn't understand how that could be true, but something deep inside her stirred, a feeling she had never known before. Then the real lessons began. Nana Casey didn't teach Tariro how to fight with weapons. She didn't teach her spells or magic. Instead, she taught her something far more powerful, self-worth. "You have spent your life being told you are nothing," Nana Casey said. "But power does not come from what others think of you. It comes from what you believe about yourself." At first, it was difficult. Tariro had been conditioned to see herself as weak. But as the days passed, she started noticing changes, subtle but undeniable. She didn't feel as exhausted, even when she hadn't eaten for days. Her body, once frail and weak, seemed to hold more strength. She started to sense things. When people were lying, when they were afraid, when their words didn't match their true intentions. She could feel the shift in the air, the hidden truths beneath the surface. And something even more powerful, when she spoke with confidence, people listened, even those who once ignored her, even the villagers who had turned away from her suffering. She wasn't invisible anymore. Then, one fateful afternoon, everything changed. Tariro was scrubbing the floor of the hut when Jalia stormed in. Her eyes were dark with rage, her lips twisted in a sneer. "You lazy, useless girl," she snapped, kicking over the bucket of water. "You think you can rest while others work?" Tariro, for the first time in her life, didn't look away. She stood up slowly and met Jalia's gaze. She didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She just stood there. Jalia's anger exploded. "Don't you dare look at me like that!" she shrieked, raising her hand to slap Tariro across the face. Tariro's instincts took over. Before the blow could land, she lifted her own hand, and something unseen stopped Jalia's arm mid-air. Jalia's eyes widened in shock. Her hand trembled, suspended in the air, as if held back by an invisible force. Tariro felt it, a power she didn't fully understand, but one that had always been inside her, waiting to be awakened. Jalia stumbled backward, her breath shallow, her face pale with fear. For the first time, she was the one afraid. Tariro didn't say a word. She didn't have to, because in that moment, they both knew. Tariro was no longer powerless. The weight that had pressed on her chest for years was gone. She was no longer the scared, helpless girl who flinched at Jalia's every command. Something inside her had shifted, something deep and unbreakable. That morning, as she stepped out of the hut, the sun felt warmer on her skin, the air lighter. Jalia stood by the cooking fire, her sharp eyes narrowing when she saw Tariro. "Fetch water," she ordered, her voice as cruel as ever. For the first time in her life, Tariro didn't move. She didn't rush to obey, didn't lower her head. She simply stood still, looking directly at Jalia. "No," she said, her voice calm but firm. Jalia froze. Chain, who had been lazily kicking stones nearby, looked up in shock. Tariro had never refused an order before. "What did you say?" Jalia hissed, stepping closer. Tariro met her gaze without fear. "I said no." The silence that followed was heavy, thick with disbelief. Jalia's face twisted with anger, but something flickered in her eyes, something Tariro had never seen before. Fear. Tariro turned and walked away, her heart steady. She didn't run, didn't cower, didn't wait for Jalia's wrath. She simply left, leaving Jalia and Chain standing there, stunned. The village began to notice. The girl who once kept her head down, who avoided eye contact, who moved like a shadow. She was different now. She walked with quiet confidence, her steps lighter, her back straighter. People whispered as she passed, sensing something had changed, though they couldn't quite explain what. Jalia noticed too. She watched Tariro with wary eyes, unsettled by the shift. The girl she had controlled for years no longer obeyed, no longer feared her. Jalia's paranoia grew with each passing day. She felt Tariro's presence like a threat, like something she could no longer contain. One evening, Jalia cornered Tariro outside the hut. "You think you're special now?" she spat. "You think you can defy me?" Tariro didn't react. She didn't need to. She simply looked at Jalia, calm and steady. And in that moment, Jalia felt it. Something unseen, something powerful, radiating from the girl she once saw as weak. Jalia took a step back. For the first time, she was the one afraid. Meanwhile, Masimba began to notice things he had ignored for years. He saw the way Tariro's clothes hung loosely on her thin frame. He noticed the bruises that had faded, but never quite disappeared. He saw how his daughter, who had once been so full of life as a child, had been reduced to silence and obedience. But now, there was something else in her, something strong, and for the first time, he started to question the woman he had trusted. "Tariro," he said one evening as they sat outside, the fire crackling between them. "Tell me the truth. Has Jalia mistreated you?" Tariro met his gaze, her heart steady. She had spent years hoping he would ask, years waiting for him to see. And now, at last, he did. She took a deep breath. "Yes!" Masimba's hands clenched into fists. The truth, spoken aloud, was like a blade cutting through the silence. And he knew he had been blind for too long. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth after the night's rain. A choice lingered, heavy like the storm that had passed. The pain endured for years, the scars left unseen. Justice whispered for retribution. The idea of revenge burned hot, tempting, promising the satisfaction of watching fear flicker in the eyes that had once held nothing but cruelty. But another voice, wiser, steadier, spoke against it. "Power is only good if it is used wisely. Do not become like those who hurt you." The words rang clear, a warning not to let darkness consume what had just been reclaimed. There was another way, a way that would break the chains of suffering without binding another in them. Determination replaced anger. Truth would be the weapon, not vengeance, not fists or fear, but words. stronger than any punishment Jalea could ever imagine. The village square was alive with chatter as people gathered, unsuspecting of what was about to unfold. Faces that had turned away from suffering, eyes that had looked past bruises and hunger. Today, they would see everything they had ignored. A voice rose, steady and clear, cutting through the murmurs. For years, silence has been my prison, but no more. Heads turned, curiosity replaced indifference. I was beaten, starved, treated as less than a person in my own home. A pause, letting the weight of the words settle. And many of you knew. A hush fell over the crowd. Some shifted uncomfortably. Others lowered their gazes. A figure stiffened in the crowd. Eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but there was none. The truth had been spoken, and it could not be undone. A man, once blind to the suffering within his own home, stepped forward, voice thick with emotion. Is this true? The question was not meant for the speaker, but for the one who had hidden behind lies for so long. Denial came swiftly. She lies. Desperation clung to every word, but the crowd had already seen too much, heard too much. The walls of deception crumbled. The weight of judgment shifted. Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to gasps. I trusted. Betrayal laced the words of the one who had once been fooled. You were meant to protect, not destroy. Panic took hold. Pleas spilled out. Hands reached for mercy, but mercy had long been lost in the years of cruelty. This was not vengeance. It was justice. A reckoning delivered not with fists, but with truth. Shame replaced power. The mighty fell, not by force, but by the weight of their own sins. There was no need for further punishment. Living in disgrace was enough. A deep breath filled lungs that had once been constricted by fear. The battle had been won, not with hate, but with strength, not with revenge, but with righteousness. And in that moment, freedom was finally real. The night air was thick with anticipation. As the village gathered under the great baobab tree, the fire crackled, casting flickering shadows across the faces of those who had unknowingly played a part in years of silent suffering. Laughter and chatter filled the air, but one voice cut through it all, strong and unwavering. I have something to say. Silence fell as all eyes turned. The once timid girl, who had spent years moving like a shadow, now stood tall. There was no fear in her voice, no hesitation in her stance. For years, I have been trapped in a life of pain, she began. Beaten, starved, treated like nothing. And many of you saw it. Many of you knew, but none of you spoke. A ripple of unease spread through the crowd. People shifted uncomfortably. Some looked away, shame creeping into their expressions. Without another word, she reached up and removed the scarf from her shoulders. Gasps echoed through the gathering as the firelight revealed the scars. Deep, unforgiving reminders of every blow, every cruel act endured. Mothers covered their mouths in horror. Fathers clenched their jaws. Children stared, wide-eyed, unable to comprehend such cruelty. The truth had been hidden for so long, but now it was undeniable. A man stepped forward, his face tight with guilt and fury. Who did this to you? His voice wavered, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he was terrified of it. A figure in the crowd flinched. Beads of sweat formed on her brow. She had always relied on silence, on ignorance, on the fear that had kept the truth buried. But now there was no escape. I trusted you, the man continued, turning to the woman beside him. His voice was low, dangerous. I left my daughter in your care. She opened her mouth, grasping for excuses, but before she could speak, a force stronger than fear held her still. A pair of unwavering eyes bore into her, demanding honesty, and against her will, the truth spilled out. I was jealous, she stammered. I wanted her to suffer. The words fell into the silence like stones into deep water. A collective gasp rose from the villagers. A boy beside her trembled, his face paling. Mother? His voice was small, uncertain. The mask she had worn for so long shattered before his eyes. The man, father, husband, leader, stared at her, his hands trembling with barely contained rage. You are no wife of mine. You are no mother. A murmur spread through the crowd. Then a voice rose from the elders. She does not belong here. Neither of them do. The verdict was final. No plea, no excuse could erase the years of cruelty, the scars, the stolen childhood. The woman collapsed to her knees, but no hands reached to help her. The boy, once so proud, now stood frozen, realizing that the world as he knew it had shattered. A final order was given. Leave, never return. As they disappeared into the night, whispers filled the air, but not of pity for them. The village had seen justice, delivered not with violence, but with truth. An elder stepped forward, eyes full of wisdom. "Tariro," he said, his voice carrying weight, "you are not just a girl who suffered. You are of a bloodline meant to lead." The woman who had guided her through the darkness finally spoke. "Your mother's legacy lives in you." And in that moment, the past no longer defined her. She was no longer just the girl who had been hurt. She was something greater. She was free. The sky stretched wide above, painted in soft hues of orange and gold as the sun began to set. The air felt different, lighter, as if the village itself had exhaled after holding its breath for too long. The weight of fear, of pain, of endless suffering had lifted. For the first time in years, she could breathe freely. There was no longer a need to creep around the house in silence, no reason to flinch at sudden movements or harsh voices. The cruel hands that had once hurt her were gone, banished to a fate they had earned. What remained was a home that finally felt like hers. A hesitant voice broke the quiet. "Tariro." Turning, she found him standing there, eyes filled with guilt, shoulders heavy with regret. For so long, he had been a distant figure, a father in name only. He had turned a blind eye to her suffering, choosing the comfort of ignorance over the painful truth. But now, he could no longer hide from what had been done. "I should have protected you," Masimba admitted, his voice thick with sorrow. "I failed you. Years of pain could not be erased with a few words." The wounds ran deep, but so did the longing for a family that had been lost long ago. The little girl who had once wished for her father's love still lived inside her, though she had learned to stop hoping. A long silence stretched between them before she spoke. "You cannot change the past." The words held no anger, only quiet strength. "But we can choose what happens next." A promise was made, to rebuild, to heal, to become the father he should have been, and the daughter who no longer had to live in fear. Word of what had happened spread quickly through the village. People who had once ignored her suffering now saw her in a new light. They whispered about the girl who had endured so much yet still stood tall, the girl who had spoken truth and shattered the silence. The elders called for her, their faces unreadable as they sat in a circle beneath the ancient baobab tree. These were men and women who had led the village for generations, keepers of wisdom and tradition. One of them, an old man with deep lines carved into his face, studied her carefully. "You carry more than just pain, child," he finally said. "You carry strength, wisdom, the spirit of those who came before you." Another elder nodded. "Your mother's blood was royal, but it is your heart that proves you are worthy." An offer was made, a place among them, not because of her lineage, but because of the person she had become. Shock filled her chest. For so long she had been nothing more than a servant in her own home, a girl no one defended. Now, the village elders, the most respected figures in their world, were offering her a seat among them. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she lifted her chin, standing tall. "I accept." Beside her, the woman who had guided her through the darkness smiled. Nana Kessie had seen something in her before she had seen it in herself. She had planted the seeds of courage, and now they had begun to bloom. But the journey was not over. There were others still trapped in silence, others suffering as she once had. No child should endure what she had survived. A new purpose settled in her heart. She would not just sit among the elders, she would use her voice to bring change. The past would not define her. The scars would not hold her back. Instead, they would serve as a reminder of what she had overcome. For the first time in her life, she was truly free, and she would make sure that others would find their freedom too. A new day had begun, and with it, a future she would shape with her own hand. The lesson remained, passed down through generations. It was spoken in quiet conversations under the shade of ancient trees, and shared in the warmth of evening fires. It was not just words, but a truth that had been witnessed by many, a reminder of what resilience looked like. It became a message of hope, a story that parents told their children when they faced hardship. No matter how impossible the struggle seemed, no matter how cruel the world could be, there was always a way to rise above it. Strength was not about revenge, nor about overpowering others. It was about standing tall, even when the world tried to push you down. People no longer looked away when they saw suffering. They no longer remained silent when injustice happened before them. The change was real, and it spread through every corner of the village, shaping a new future where kindness was no longer seen as weakness, and courage was not only for the strong, but for anyone who refused to be broken. Time moved forward, but the impact never faded. What had once been a quiet existence filled with pain had transformed into something greater. The past was not erased, but it no longer held power over the present. The scars remained, not as marks of suffering, but as proof of survival. And so, the name lived on, not in sorrow, not in tragedy, but as a reminder of what it meant to rise beyond pain, to choose light over darkness, and to never let fear decide one's fate. It was not just remembered, it became a lesson for all.